Attention, citizens of the United States. This is an emergency broadcast from Station Z6, coming to you live from an undisclosed location. If you can hear this, it means that some communication channels are still intact. But let me warn you, what's unfolding is unlike anything we've faced before. I repeat, this is not a drill. Stay calm, stay vigilant, and listen closely. At approximately 6 p.m. Eastern Time yesterday, initial reports began trickling in from Manhattan. These reports were fragmented and chaotic. Accounts of violent attacks, individuals behaving erratically, and widespread panic. At first, the authorities treated it as a series of isolated incidents, possibly connected to a drug outbreak or mass hysteria. But within hours, the scale of the violence exploded. By dawn, the truth could no longer be denied. This is a zombie outbreak, unlike anything previously imagined outside of fiction. Individuals infected by this unknown virus lose all humanity, driven by a primal and violent need to spread the infection further. Victims exhibit pale, decaying skin, glassy eyes, and extreme aggression. Worst of all, the infection spreads with alarming speed. A single bite or exposure to infected blood is enough to turn someone within minutes. Let me give you an update on the current state of the nation. As of now, New York City is ground zero for the outbreak. The streets are in utter chaos. Littered with abandoned vehicles and debris, smoke rises from multiple fires, and emergency sirens echo across the city, though fewer and fewer responders remain active. Manhattan has been overrun, and Brooklyn and Queens are quickly following. Officials have declared a full-scale evacuation of New York City, but roads and bridges are gridlocked, with panicked residents attempting to flee. Airports and train stations have been shut down indefinitely. The National Guard has been deployed in an attempt to contain the outbreak, but initial efforts have been met with devastating losses. We are receiving unconfirmed reports that key government buildings, including the New York City Mayor's office, have been overrun. To anyone still in the city, I urge you to seek shelter immediately. Do not attempt to leave unless you have a clear and safe route. But New York is not the only area affected. There are reports coming in from across the country, Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles. The outbreak is spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Entire neighborhoods are falling silent as the infected overrun them. This virus is relentless, and so far no cure or treatment has been identified. Medical personnel working on the front lines have described the outbreak as a biological nightmare. Hospitals are overwhelmed, and supplies are running out. The CDC has issued guidelines emphasizing one critical point: avoid all contact with the infected. They are no longer human. Internationally, the reaction has been swift but cautious. Canada has announced the immediate closure of its southern border, citing the need to protect its citizens from the spread of the virus. Mexico, too, has stationed troops along its northern border. European nations are mobilizing their own emergency plans, with some sending aid to assist evacuation efforts. However, whispers are growing that other nations are beginning to abandon hope of containing the outbreak in the United States. Listeners, let me paint you a picture of what's happening here. Smoke billows over the New York skyline, darkening the horizon. Streets that were once alive with energy and noise are now eerily silent, broken only by the occasional sound of distant screams or the moaning of the infected. Entire communities are vanishing overnight, leaving behind nothing but destruction and despair. And yet, amidst all this chaos, there are glimpses of humanity's resilience. In some neighborhoods, groups of survivors have banded together, barricading themselves in buildings and pooling their resources. Across the nation, families are forming survival plans, determined to protect their loved ones at all costs. If you're listening to this broadcast, know that there is still hope. We are still here. I am still here. I will continue to bring you updates, survival tips, and information that could save your life. But right now, you must act. Secure your home. Barricade doors and windows. Stock up on essential supplies: water, non-perishable food, flashlights, batteries, and first aid kits. If you are in a densely populated area, consider evacuating to a safer, less crowded region. Move only during daylight hours and avoid attracting attention. This is not a time for heroics. Avoid contact with the infected at all costs. They may look like people you know, friends, neighbors, loved ones, but they are not. This virus has stripped them of everything human. To those in the Midwest, you still have time to prepare. Gather your resources and create a plan. To those on the West Coast, keep monitoring official evacuation zones. They may be your lifeline. And to those in New York, if you can hear me, stay strong. Help is on the way. But it may not arrive in time. The president is expected to address the nation soon, but rumors suggest that martial law could be declared within hours. If that happens, it will mean the suspension of all civil liberties to focus entirely on containing this outbreak. I know many of you are scared. I know the uncertainty feels overwhelming. But we have faced crises before, and we will survive this one too. Do not give in to despair. Do not lose hope. You are not alone. Stay tuned for further updates. Stay strong, America. If you're just tuning in, this is Z6 broadcasting live from the heart of the apocalypse. The situation continues to deteriorate at an unprecedented pace, and, as grim as it is, it's my duty to give you an unfiltered picture of the chaos consuming our nation. Let's start with New York City, ground zero for this outbreak. It is no longer a city but a battlefield, a crumbling monument to humanity's fragility. Manhattan is eerily quiet, save for the distant sounds of screams and gunfire. Smoke continues to rise from the once bustling skyline as fires, unchecked, consume entire blocks. Reports from our remaining correspondents indicate that most bridges leading out of the city are either destroyed or under heavy military control. Survivors trying to escape on foot have been met with roadblocks, panic, and, in some cases, the infected swarming in hordes. Across the Hudson River, New Jersey is bracing for the inevitable. Newark, once a gateway for international travelers, has become a scene of mass panic. The airport has been closed indefinitely, and evacuation efforts have been halted due to overwhelming infected activity. Local authorities are urging residents to stay indoors, but with electricity failing in most neighborhoods, the nights are long, cold, and terrifying. Further south, Philadelphia has succumbed to the outbreak. Emergency responders have abandoned large parts of the city as they are overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of infected. Eyewitnesses describe scenes that sound almost surreal. Empty subway trains screeching into stations, their carriages filled with nothing but bloodstains and broken glass. The famous Liberty Bell remains intact for now, but it rings hollow in a city that has lost so many of its people overnight. Moving westward, the outbreak shows no signs of slowing. Chicago, once a bustling hub of culture and commerce, is falling. The Loop, the city's financial district, is in ruins. Fires rage uncontrolled, sending plumes of smoke into the air that can be seen for miles. Hospitals, already overwhelmed with early victims, have become epicenters for infection. Emergency rooms, once places of hope and healing, are now breeding grounds for chaos and death. Eyewitness accounts are flooding in from all over. Here's one from a truck driver named Carla, who barely made it out of Kansas City. They were everywhere, crawling out of alleys and shadows. I thought I could drive through, but they started piling up on the hood of my truck. I've never seen anything like it. It was like they didn't feel pain, didn't even care if they got crushed. I lost my husband back there. He told me to drive, and I didn't even look back. Los Angeles, a city that once symbolized dreams, is now a city of nightmares. Hollywood Boulevard, known for its glitz and glamour, is a desolate stretch of abandoned vehicles and shattered storefronts. The famed Hollywood sign, usually a beacon of hope and opportunity, looms over the chaos like a silent, unblinking witness to humanity's darkest hour. The West Coast is on high alert, with local authorities racing against time to establish quarantine zones. The infrastructure of our great nation is collapsing under the weight of this crisis. Power outages are spreading rapidly as energy grids, overwhelmed by demand and lacking maintenance, are beginning to fail. Major highways, the arteries of American life, are now clogged with abandoned cars. The only vehicles moving are those of desperate survivors or military convoys, and even they are often forced to turn back. Airports are grounded, and train stations are eerily silent. The world feels smaller now, with no means of escape. In Washington, D.C., the situation remains precarious. While the White House and other key government buildings are heavily fortified, reports suggest that infected clusters have breached the outskirts of the city. The military presence is strong, but there is tension in the air as the Capitol tries to maintain control of a nation spiraling into chaos. Internationally, the responses are as varied as they are revealing. Our neighbors to the north, Canada, have declared a state of emergency and have officially closed their borders to refugees from the United States. Canadian Prime Minister Emily Carter addressed her nation earlier today, stating, "We grieve with our American neighbors, but we must prioritize the safety of our own citizens." Troops are now stationed along the U.S.-Canada border, enforcing this controversial decision. Meanwhile, in Mexico, a similar scenario is unfolding. Armed checkpoints have been set up along the border, and Mexican President Raul Escobar has issued a statement. "We will provide humanitarian aid where possible, but the infection must not cross into our lands." Refugees attempting to flee southward have reported long lines, delays, and tragically, violent clashes at the border. Across the Atlantic, Europe is closely monitoring the situation. The United Kingdom has issued a travel ban for all flights originating from the United States. France has sent limited medical supplies, but there are murmurs of hesitation as European leaders debate whether to risk more resources. Meanwhile, China has called for an emergency United Nations meeting, though many believe it's already too late for diplomacy to change the tide of this catastrophe. Despite the grim reality, pockets of hope do exist. Reports from the Midwest suggest that small, rural communities are faring better than their urban counterparts. One survivor from Nebraska shared this message. "We've banded together, 12 families, living off what we can grow and hunt. It's not easy, but out here we've got space, and that seems to be our biggest advantage. We're not giving up without a fight." But even in these places, the infection looms. The infected are tireless, needing neither food nor rest. They are spreading, and the fight is far from over. This is Z6 bringing you the truth, no matter how painful. If you're listening, know this. You are not alone. We are in this together, and together we will find a way to survive. I'll be back soon with survival tips and updates. For now, stay safe, America. This is Z6, broadcasting to all survivors across America. If you're hearing this, it means you're still fighting to survive, and that's all that matters now. The world, as we knew it, is gone, but you're still here. We've gathered the best survival instructions to keep you alive during this zombie apocalypse. Listen carefully and act decisively. Every choice you make could save your life. First things first, your location is your lifeline. Where you are now determines how you'll navigate the chaos. Urban centers like Los Angeles, New York City, and Chicago are the epicenters of danger. These cities, with their dense populations, were the first to fall. The infected roam the streets, drawn by noise and movement. Supplies are scarce, and tensions among survivors run high. If you're in one of these hotspots, your top priority is to get out. Escaping a city, however, isn't as simple as packing a bag and hitting the road. The highways are choked with abandoned vehicles, and the infected swarm wherever noise lingers. Stick to back roads, alleyways, and if possible, rooftops. Move during the early hours of the morning when visibility is better and the infected are less active. If you can't leave the city, fortify your position. If you're trapped in an urban area, survival hinges on securing a defensible shelter. Look for buildings with limited entry points. libraries, warehouses, or small office buildings. Avoid large malls or hospitals. While they may seem resource-rich, they're also prime gathering spots for both the infected and desperate survivors. Once inside, barricade every possible entrance. Use heavy furniture, steel doors, or even broken down cars if you have to. Reinforce windows with wooden planks or metal grates. Remember, the infected are relentless. Even a small crack in your defenses can be catastrophic. If you're in a high-rise building, try to block off the stairwells and disable elevators to prevent the infected from reaching higher floors. For those in suburban or rural areas, natural barriers like rivers, cliffs, or dense forests can serve as effective deterrents. Build improvised defenses using what's around you: sharp stakes to deter intruders, ditches to slow down movement, and tripwires to alert you of approaching danger. Survival starts with preparation. Here's what you need. Water. Your body can't survive more than 3 days without water. Collect rainwater, locate streams, or use portable filters to purify what you find. Avoid stagnant water, which could carry diseases. Food. Focus on long-lasting, nutrient-dense items like canned goods, dried fruits, and protein bars. If you're in the countryside, learn to forage for edible plants and hunt small game. First aid. Minor injuries can become deadly in this world. Always carry bandages, antiseptics, and painkillers. Stockpile prescription medications when possible. Tools: a sturdy knife, multi-tool, rope, flashlight with extra batteries, and fire starters are essential for survival. Weapons. Guns can be effective, but attract the infected due to their noise. Instead, rely on silent weapons like machetes, crowbars, or even sharpened sticks. Traveling in this world is a calculated risk. Always move with caution, and never assume a path is safe. Before venturing out, observe the area from a high vantage point. Look for patterns in the infected's movement, and identify possible escape routes. When traveling, keep your group small and coordinated. Large groups attract attention and are harder to move efficiently. Stick to the shadows and avoid making noise. Use hand signals or prearranged cues to communicate. Remember, it's not just the infected you need to watch out for. Other survivors, driven by desperation, can be just as dangerous. The U.S. is vast, and the challenges you'll face vary depending on your region. In the north, winter can slow the infected, but poses its own threats. Insulate your shelter using snow, blankets, and anything else that retains heat. Layer your clothing and ration fuel carefully. If possible, build underground shelters to avoid the harsh winds and freezing temperatures. In the south, heat and dehydration are your enemies. Carry extra water, limit movement during peak sunlight, and use natural shade to avoid heat stroke. Swamps and marshlands can offer protection from the infected, but come with their own dangers: alligators, snakes, and disease-carrying insects. On the coasts, rising sea levels and eroded shorelines make coastal areas treacherous. Boats can provide temporary safety, but ensure they're stocked with sufficient food and water. Avoid venturing too far out into open water. Storms and lack of navigational tools can quickly turn deadly. While survival often feels like a solitary battle, working together increases your odds. A group can share resources, divide labor, and provide much-needed emotional support. That said, trust is a fragile commodity. Choose your allies carefully. Assign specific roles within your group. Have someone focus on scavenging, another on fortifications, and a third on scouting. Always have someone on watch, especially at night. Rotating shifts ensures everyone gets rest without compromising security. Unity is your greatest defense against despair. Share stories, create routines, and hold on to your humanity. A strong group can weather any storm. The apocalypse is as much a test of the mind as it is of the body. Loneliness, fear, and despair can chip away at your will to live. Combat this by maintaining small rituals, whether it's saying a prayer, keeping a journal, or sharing a meal together. Hope is your greatest weapon against the darkness. Even when things seem bleak, remind yourself of what you're fighting for. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about preserving the possibility of a better future. Close encounters with the infected are inevitable. When they happen, remember this: stay calm. Panic will only make you vulnerable. If you're spotted, don't run aimlessly. Find a choke point or narrow space where you can control the fight. Silent weapons like bats or crowbars are ideal in these situations. If escape isn't possible, use the environment to your advantage. Trap the infected in rooms, block their paths with heavy objects, or use fire as a last resort. However, be cautious. Fire can spread unpredictably and draw even more infected. We'll leave you with this: survival isn't about luck. It's about preparation, adaptability, and resilience. Every day you survive, you're proving that humanity isn't finished yet. You are the ember of hope in this darkness. This is Z6 reporting in. For those of you still holding on, listen closely. The situation has gone from bad to worse, and it seems there's no end in sight. The infection is spreading faster than anticipated, and it's not just the undead that we have to worry about anymore. The world around us is crumbling, and we need to adapt fast. It was only a matter of time before it reached the heart of our government. The zombies have breached the Pentagon, and in doing so, they've ignited a level of chaos we never thought possible. What was once considered the impenetrable heart of American military power is now a burning ruin, overrun by the infected. There are reports of soldiers fleeing the area, abandoning their posts in a panicked retreat, and even those who remain are overwhelmed and unable to hold back the horde. Panic has spread through the East Coast like wildfire. Cities such as Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Philadelphia are now on the brink of collapse. New York City's already volatile situation has worsened. The infected are growing in number, moving like a tide through the streets. What was once considered an isolated outbreak in a few cities is now a full-scale national disaster, with survivors scattered and barely clinging to any hope of normalcy. If you're on the East Coast, keep moving, keep quiet, and avoid any large groups. The military's last-ditch attempt to regain control through airstrikes failed. The bombs did little to stop the mass of infected swarming in the streets and barely made a dent in the chaos unfolding. It seems the military may have underestimated the strength and scale of this disaster, and we're left to pick up the pieces, as if the outbreak itself weren't enough. Nature is turning against us. Unrelenting storms have begun battering the country, sweeping in from the Gulf Coast. Tornadoes are tearing through the Midwest, while hurricane-force winds slam into the eastern seaboard, pushing the flooding deeper into already overwhelmed cities. The storms seem to be growing stronger by the day, and we can only guess whether this is a consequence of climate change or some other twisted omen in this hellish new world. The floods are leaving entire towns submerged, and the already decimated infrastructure is crumbling faster. Power outages are widespread, and those who aren't trapped by the storm are forced to deal with bitter cold, brutal heat, or dangerous winds. If you're hearing this from an area that's been hit by these storms, seek shelter immediately. Find a building with a solid foundation and high ground, and avoid areas that have already been flooded. The storm's ferocity means that the infected may be more scattered in these areas, but it also means they're being forced into new locations. Always remain alert. But it doesn't stop there. It's not just the infected we need to fear anymore. The situation has grown complicated by the appearance of other survivors, desperate and willing to do whatever it takes to survive. Reports have emerged of raiders attacking both small groups of survivors and the last remaining strongholds of humanity. Armed bands of marauders are moving in from the south and west, overrunning smaller towns for food, shelter, and resources. These ruthless factions are often more dangerous than the infected themselves, using brutality and surprise attacks to weaken groups of survivors. And if that wasn't enough, there's word of external forces taking advantage of the chaos. Some governments, seeing the collapse of the United States as a sign of opportunity, are considering intervention. While no country has officially sent troops yet, there have been reports of military aircraft near the borders, and a few nations have begun establishing travel bans or strictly enforcing border patrols. Meanwhile, on the international front, media outlets around the world are scrambling to make sense of what's happening. From the UK to Russia, the reports are conflicting and unclear. Some foreign governments are reporting that the U.S. has fallen under complete martial law, with martial forces unable to regain control. Others claim that the situation is under control, misleading the general population into thinking the worst has passed. Confusion is spreading, not just within the United States, but across the globe. This is what's creating a deep sense of paranoia in many survivors. Is the world watching? Or are they turning their backs on the U.S., leaving us to face this nightmare alone? Every day, the media seems to report different facts. Some say the infection is contained in the East Coast, while others report it's spreading to the Midwest and even reaching parts of the South. Are the military's efforts failing? We don't have a clear answer, and if you're hearing this, chances are you're as much in the dark as the rest of us. The government is no longer functioning as it should. There's no communication between the military and what's left of the civilian authorities. A few scattered remnants of local governments have taken charge in some regions, but they're operating in survival mode, often trading in scarce resources like water and food for protection and shelter. The White House is no longer standing either. Early reports showed that the government evacuated, but it was clear that the zombie outbreak reached Washington, D.C. too quickly for any meaningful response. With the Pentagon now compromised, the U.S. Capitol has been abandoned, the chain of command has crumbled, and without a central figure to guide the country, it's every man and woman for themselves. With a total collapse of law enforcement, local police forces have either abandoned their posts or been overtaken by the infected. Many survivors now form vigilante groups to defend what little they have left. The national law enforcement system is gone. It's the Wild West out there. If you want to survive, you'll have to rely on your own instincts and resources. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is watching in disbelief. China, Russia, and several European nations have issued conflicting reports to their citizens. Some claim that the United States has all but fallen, and they've begun offering asylum to survivors if they can make it to the ports. Others assert that America is on the mend, with only pockets of resistance left to deal with. This conflicting information makes it all the more difficult to know who to trust. Allies who once supported us are now questioning their roles in this disaster. Some nations have sent humanitarian aid, but most are focused on their own survival. The aid, when it does arrive, is often intercepted by raiders or never makes it past military checkpoints. Trust in the outside world is crumbling. No one knows who's coming to our aid, or whether anyone else is struggling as we are. With the infection spreading, the weather growing more violent, and external forces eyeing our vulnerability, it's clear that our fight for survival is no longer just about avoiding the undead. We are in a race against time to keep ourselves safe from both the living and the dead. Survivors, hold your ground and stay alert. This apocalypse is far from over, and every hour brings with it new threats, both seen and unseen. Whatever you've prepared for, it may no longer be enough. Adapt, survive, stay one step ahead. This is Z6 Radio. We'll be back with further updates as long as we can keep broadcasting. Stay strong, and remember, hope is the last thing you lose. This is Z6 Radio, and we're still here with you. We've been bringing you the updates, but now it's your turn. We're opening the lines to hear directly from you, the survivors. Your voices, your stories, and your experiences matter. We're not just reporting from the front lines. We're here with you, struggling through this chaos together. First call from Ryan from Texas. We've got Ryan from Texas on the line. Ryan, what's the situation over there? Ryan, via radio. Hey, this is Ryan from Houston. My family and I were holed up in an old grocery store, but it's getting bad. The food's running out, and we don't know what to do. There are groups of people nearby, but we can't trust anyone anymore. We've barricaded the doors, but the zombies, they just keep coming. I need advice, man. What's the next move? Ryan, I hear you, brother. First off, let's take a deep breath. You've done the right thing by barricading yourselves. The grocery store is a good choice for shelter. Lots of space, plenty of food if you've stocked up. But the reality is you're going to need to fortify that place more than ever now. Check your barricades, reinforce any entry points, and make sure they can't get in without a fight. Use anything you can find, shelves, refrigerators, or metal bars. It's about making sure that the infected can't break through. And about the food, you're right to be worried. If you've got any non-perishables left, ration them. It's all about making things last as long as possible. You don't want to waste food, but you also don't want to be starving in a few days. The key is working together. Don't hesitate to break down parts of the store for supplies. Try to make a small community of other survivors if possible. Keep the morale up and don't let fear take over. You're not alone, Ryan. We're all in this together. Second call from Emma from California. Next up, we've got Emma from California. Emma, what's the word? Emma, via radio. Hey, I'm in Los Angeles. What's left of it? And it's hell here. I was able to escape the initial chaos, but the city is falling apart. People are panicking. The traffic's a nightmare, and now every time I try to find a safe place, I see infected wandering around. I'm alone now, just me and my dog, and I'm wondering if there's a safe place to go. Where should I head? And how do I get there? Emma, it's good that you've got your dog with you. That's one thing to hold on to in all of this madness. Los Angeles has become a war zone in its own right. But listen, you're not totally out of options just yet. First, stay calm. The West Coast, especially the cities like LA and San Francisco, have been hit hard. But they're not totally gone. The key is getting out of the center and moving toward a quieter area, away from the chaos. If you've got any maps or a GPS, try heading north to the mountains. Look for places that are off the beaten path, far away from heavily infected zones. Places like the San Bernardino National Forest might offer shelter and safety, especially if you can find an abandoned cabin or something that provides solid protection. But here's the thing, Emma. Don't travel alone if you can avoid it. If there are other survivors nearby, try to team up for safety. And always watch your back. The infected are everywhere, but the worst threat right now are other survivors, people desperate enough to do anything. Trust your instincts and don't get caught off guard. Third call from Frank from New York. We've got Frank from New York City on the line. Frank, are you there? Frank, via radio. Yeah, I'm here. Frank from Queens. Things are real bad over here. We're trapped in a building. They're infected outside. And the power's gone. No running water, no food, no light. We've been trying to stay hidden, but the streets are a mess. And now we're hearing reports that the bridges are being blocked. No one can get in or out. Should we try to move? Frank, I know you're in a tough spot. New York City is in complete chaos right now. The infected are everywhere, and the infrastructure is gone. If you're holed up in a building, stay there. Don't risk moving unless it's absolutely necessary. It sounds like you've got a good hideout for now, but you need to make sure that you're using your resources wisely. Power's down, but there are other ways to stay safe. Use flashlights only when you have to, and avoid making too much noise. Any sound can attract attention, and the last thing you want is a horde banging at your door. If the bridges are blocked and you can't get out, your best bet is to hunker down where you are. Don't try to cross over to the mainland unless you absolutely have to. It's a risk you don't want to take. But if things go from bad to worse, you'll need to stay one step ahead of both the infected and any other threats. Make sure you've got a means of defending yourself, Frank. Anything from makeshift weapons to firearms if you can find them. Now, let's look at what's going on outside the U.S. It's not just our country in crisis. The world is reacting to what's happening here. We're hearing reports that several countries are starting to take action, though it's not all good news. In France, there's word that the government has deployed troops to assist in providing humanitarian aid to Americans stranded abroad. While that might sound like hope, many countries have closed their borders, fearing the outbreak could spread beyond our shores. Some nations are offering refuge to survivors, but the truth is, Resources are scarce everywhere, and many are more focused on their own survival. Meanwhile, Canada's borders are tight. They've limited the number of refugees they're allowing in, even though they've sent some medical assistance to the affected areas of the U.S.-Mexico, has also reinforced its southern border and is preventing any unregulated crossings from the U.S. into their territory. This is a harsh reminder that we're not just battling the infected, we're also fighting for resources and shelter. Survivors may find themselves alone, separated from families, and struggling to find help outside the borders. The geopolitical situation is shifting, and the world seems to be scrambling to save itself from the contagion. We'll continue to monitor global responses, but for now, all we can do is brace ourselves for what comes next. Thank you to everyone who called in today. Your stories are why we're still here broadcasting. We may not know what tomorrow brings, but we know this. We'll face it together. Keep those radios on, stay alert, and remember, there's strength in numbers, and we'll find a way through this. Stay safe, survivors, and keep fighting. This is Z6, and we're here with you in the darkest hour. The situation has worsened beyond all expectations, and what we're about to report will change everything for the survivors. Brace yourselves for what's coming. Breaking news just in the unthinkable has happened. New York City has fallen. What was once a bustling metropolis, a symbol of resilience, has been overrun. The infected have breached the last remaining lines of defense. The military forces have retreated. Governor Hale just confirmed it. The city is lost. From the reports, it seems like it happened in waves. The initial outbreak was slow, but then, like a storm, it swept across the city. Thousands, perhaps millions, are trapped inside. The bridges are down. The tunnels are compromised. There's no escape for those stuck within the city limits. The few who made it out barely survived the chaos. Others, they didn't even make it past the first wave. We've been talking about the strength of communities and the importance of keeping hope alive. But this is different. This is the tipping point. If New York, one of the most fortified cities in the world, can fall like this, what does that mean for the rest of us? As the crisis deepens, we've just received another chilling announcement. The United States government has declared a total evacuation of the East Coast. This is no longer a simple evacuation. This is a full retreat. The military has abandoned large portions of the eastern cities, and now the decision has been made to pull back completely. We can hear the tension in the voices of those relaying this information. Military officers on the ground have said there is no longer a safe zone in the East Coast. The infected have breached every major line of defense. They're everywhere, and no one is safe. The government is trying to organize rescue efforts, but it's clear they're too late. Too many lives have been lost. It's not just the cities that are falling. It's the very idea of safety. The government that promised protection to its citizens is now scrambling for its own survival. I know many of you rely on these broadcasts to get updates, to hold on to a thread of hope. But right now, we need to be prepared for interruptions. We've just been informed that the power grid is unstable, and there could be a loss of signal at any time. We're seeing the first signs of broadcast disruption. Static is cutting in and out as we speak. And don't be surprised if you hear more of that. Our transmission may be interrupted without warning. We're still working to keep this station operational for as long as possible, but the longer we stay on air, the more we risk exposure to the very thing we're trying to warn you about. Listen carefully. If you're hearing us now, stay alert. Our time is running out, and we need you to be prepared for the worst. There's no telling how much longer we'll have access to these emergency broadcasts, but even if we lose this connection, remember, we're with you. I'm receiving some unsettling reports now, and I'm afraid this may be the last time you hear from me. We're getting word that the infected are getting dangerously close to our location. I'm looking out the window right now, and I can see them moving in slowly, relentlessly, The barricades have been holding, but with every passing minute, the situation is getting worse. I've been told that there's a group of survivors nearby trying to break through and make it into the building, but it's not looking good. We've done everything we can to make sure this broadcast reaches you, but it's possible, likely even, that we'll be cut off soon. We're still here though. As long as I can, I'll keep talking to you. You need to know what's coming, what to expect. We don't have much time left. Just moments ago, a breaking news alert came through. It seems the federal government is pulling out of the city completely. The last line of military defense has fallen, and the survivors, if there are any left, are now left to fend for themselves. Reports are flooding in that cities on the East Coast are descending into complete lawlessness. The National Guard has been deployed, but it's unclear how much longer they can hold their positions. They're stretched thin, and panic is setting in everywhere. Some areas are experiencing total gridlock. Cars abandoned, people fighting for whatever resources they can find. It's heartbreaking to hear, but we have to be honest with you. The worst is yet to come, and there's no guarantee that help is on the way. The United States, once a beacon of hope, is now fighting to hold on, and the rest of the world is in a similar state of disarray. Listen, if you're still tuned in, then I need you to hear me. This is our final warning. The infected are closing in on the station. I don't know how much longer we have, but I promise I will stay here as long as I can. If you hear this message, if you can still hear my voice, get to safety. Find a place to hide. Do not wait. This is the moment we've been talking about. This is the moment we've been preparing for. I've been talking about survival, about hope, about staying alive. But now, more than ever, you must rely on your instincts. Do not go out into the open unless it's absolutely necessary. Keep your doors barricaded. If you're still in one of the cities, make your way to the outskirts, to the safe zones. But remember, it's every man for himself now. I can hear the pounding at the doors. The power's flickering, and I don't know how much longer we'll have this connection. But let me leave you with one last thing. Keep your humanity. If you're alone, find others. If you're struggling, help them. We may be fighting for survival, but we don't lose our souls in the process. I don't know if I'll make it, but I want you to know that you're not alone. Stay safe. Stay strong. We're in this together. And if this is the last thing you hear from me, remember that this is not the end. It's just the beginning of a new world. You're still with us here on Z6. And even though the world outside is changing by the second, we're here to remind you that there's still hope. There's still a reason to fight. Yes, we've seen cities fall. We've seen chaos like we've never imagined. But in the darkest moments, humanity has always found a way to rise. And today, we're going to share those moments with you. Across the United States, survivors are banding together. They're not giving up. They're not folding under the weight of this crisis. In fact, some of the most remarkable acts of heroism have happened when it seemed like all was lost. Take the story out of Chicago, for instance. A group of doctors, surgeons, nurses, and other medical professionals have barricaded themselves in the heart of the city's medical district. They've turned an old hospital into a makeshift safe haven. The situation was dire, but these brave men and women have managed to hold off the infected long enough to make real progress on a possible treatment. There are rumors of a vaccine prototype that could help stop the infection from spreading. It's not much, but it's something. Hope in a syringe. These doctors, along with several survivors who've joined their cause, are working around the clock to keep the facility secure and treat anyone they can find. They're turning the hospital into a community base, a place where people can not only survive, but find purpose. They've created a system where everyone helps with either food production, medical care, or security. They've become a symbol of what's possible when humanity comes together, and they've made it clear that they will not let the infected take this city without a fight. Let me remind you that this isn't the only story of hope we're hearing. Across the country, from the survivor camps in Washington state to the defensive lines in Florida, there are signs that resilience is spreading. People are coming together. Neighbors are helping neighbors. People who were once strangers are now working side by side, whether it's fortifying defenses, sharing supplies, or simply offering emotional support in times of unspeakable loss. One group in Atlanta has even begun organizing regular evacuation runs. Despite the military's retreat, these brave individuals are taking it upon themselves to rescue those trapped in the city. They're going in by foot or on whatever makeshift vehicle they can build, dodging infected and making sure no one is left behind. They've saved over 100 lives just in the past week. As much as we're seeing a surge in local resilience, we're also seeing something else, a stark contrast in the global response to the crisis. Some countries are stepping up, offering help, sending medical supplies, and even organizing rescue missions, but unfortunately, not everyone is willing to offer their support. Take Japan, for example. Despite being oceans away from the outbreak, Japan's response has been nothing short of heroic. They've sent an entire fleet of medical supplies and personnel to California to help treat the injured and try to stabilize the situation on the West Coast. But there's a twist. Japan is not the only country involved in this international crisis. Many of you may have heard about Australia's decision to close its borders. They're citing fear of the infected spreading through refugee camps. And while that's understandable to some extent, it's hard to ignore the ripple effect of such a decision. Australia isn't alone in this. Several countries in Europe have followed suit, with France and Italy among the most vocal in their refusal to allow refugees. As the world gets smaller and the outbreak spreads, nations are starting to fortify their borders, unwilling to share resources or let people in. It's heartbreaking, really, when you think about the vast majority of survivors who are simply trying to escape the madness. But not all countries are closing their doors. Mexico, for instance, has opened its borders to survivors and is coordinating with local groups to provide shelter and food. They've started establishing humanitarian camps along the border with the United States, though the situation there is also deteriorating rapidly. Then there's Canada. Canada's government is calling on its people to mobilize and help those fleeing the violence in the United States. The Canadian military is now operating near the northern border, taking on a much larger humanitarian role than anyone expected. It's clear, when faced with an unprecedented crisis like this, nations are forced to make decisions that will define them for generations to come. Even though there's division in some parts of the world, there's also an undeniable bond that's forming. Humanity's unity in the face of disaster. When the world goes dark, people turn to each other. And we've seen countless examples of this over the past few days. Let me tell you about a survivor in San Francisco. Her name is Rachel, and she's been working tirelessly to coordinate the supply lines coming into the city. She's one of the few who's been able to communicate with nearby survivor groups. And thanks to her, the city has been able to maintain a somewhat stable food and water supply. Rachel's not just concerned about keeping the survivors in San Francisco alive. She's determined to make sure the larger Bay Area stays connected. She's made it her mission to build a network of support between survivors. She's even set up a communication system using old radios and satellite phones, and she's been acting as a liaison between the city's communities. Rachel's efforts, and those of countless others like her, remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit. We will rebuild, we will endure, and most importantly, we will fight. The heart of this country isn't in the cities or the government buildings. It's in the people. It's in the survivors. And in this, we find hope. Hope that no matter how deep the darkness gets, light can still shine through. Well, listeners, this is where we find ourselves. The world has changed in ways we never imagined. The roads we once knew now lead to chaos, and the cities we called home have become battlegrounds. But even in the darkest moments, we've seen the best of humanity rise. We've witnessed acts of courage, unity, and survival that have carried us through the most difficult days of this crisis. As we bring tonight's broadcast to a close, let's quickly review what we've learned so far. If you're just tuning in or you need a reminder, here's what you should be doing right now to stay alive. First and foremost, stay indoors. If you're not already in a safe place, find one. Barricade your doors and windows with anything you can find. It doesn't matter if it's furniture, planks of wood, or even metal sheets. Seal yourself off from the outside world. The infected aren't just dangerous, they're relentless. And if you don't have a fortified space to hold up in, you're putting yourself at risk. Second, avoid crowded areas. It's easy to panic when the streets are full of chaos, but that's exactly what the infected want. Keep your movements minimal. If you must venture outside, do it in the cover of darkness and move quickly. Third, listen for military evacuation zones. If the military still has control in your area, they might be broadcasting safe routes. But don't trust just any communication. There have been multiple instances where broadcasts were hijacked by those looking to exploit the situation. Finally, keep your resources safe. Water, food, and medical supplies are your most valuable assets right now. If you don't have enough, now is the time to find ways to ration or barter with those around you. Remember, survival is a group effort. You cannot do this alone. Work together with those nearby. Build stronger defenses. Share what you have. It's the only way to make it through. It's been a long road, and we know that the worst may still lie ahead, but we must stay vigilant. We must keep our eyes open and be ready for anything. There's no telling what the next hour or day might bring. We don't have the luxury of looking back anymore. We can only move forward, step by step, and hope that those steps lead us to safety. We'll keep updating you as long as we can, and as long as we have the ability to broadcast. But you, the survivors, the fighters, the ones holding on to hope, are the true power now. Without you, we wouldn't stand a chance. Without you, there would be no future. So, keep your head up, your spirit strong, and keep pushing forward. We'll be back with more updates as soon as we can, if we make it through the night. That is, we know the situation is getting more unpredictable by the hour, but we're doing our best to keep you informed. We'll continue to scour the airwaves for any signs of hope, any signs of rescue. The world might be falling apart around us, but we won't give up on you, and we hope you won't give up on us either. Until then, stay safe. Keep your radios tuned in. Listen for any broadcasts, even if they seem faint. We'll keep you in the loop with whatever information we can get. Just remember, no matter how bad it gets, we are still fighting, and we'll keep fighting as long as there's breath in our bodies. Hold on. I'm getting something here. It's coming through on a military frequency. Wait. Yes. This just in, satellites are picking up a new threat. It's heading directly for us. We don't have full details yet, but it looks like there's something bigger coming. We're talking about a massive force, not like anything we've seen before. It's moving fast and it's headed straight for our region. The question is, what is it? Is it a new wave of infected? A military retaliation? Or something even worse? We don't know, but one thing is for sure. This is not a drill. We'll keep monitoring the airwaves, and we'll let you know as soon as we have more information. Stay tuned, because if this threat is what we think it is, we'll need everything we've got to survive. Until then, stay alert, stay safe, and remember, don't trust anyone who isn't on your side. We'll be back soon, if we can. If you need more updates on this event, please leave a comment below, like and share this video, because we need your support more than ever. And don't forget to subscribe. Stay with us, and together we will survive.